Have you ever stopped to think that the biggest saboteur of your energy could be the pleasure you seek every day? Most men live tired, unfocused, and directionless, and don't even realize that the habit of constantly ejaculating is draining all of that. Semen retention is a powerful key. And when you decide to stop emptying yourself, you begin to fill yourself with clarity, discipline, personal power, and even spiritual connection. Sounds exaggerated? I thought so too, until I experienced it firsthand. In this video, I'll show you 10 real and profound ways my life changed after I chose retention. It's not theory, it's experience. And if you stick with me until the end, you'll understand why so many awakened men are taking this path, while the rest remain trapped in the cycle of pleasure and regret. The question is, are you ready to leave the matrix? If you're just starting out with semen retention and want to learn how to practice it the right way, safely, and with results, I prepared an essential ebook for beginners. It's a direct, simple, and transformative step-by-step guide. The link is in the first pinned comment. 1. Mental clarity instead of fog. He used to feel as if his mind were in a constant fog. It was like trying to read a map with blurry eyes. Everything seemed confused, disconnected, directionless. But with semen retention, something surprising happened. The fog gradually lifted. With each week without ejaculating, his head felt clearer, his reasoning sharper. Suddenly, he began to think more precisely, like someone taking off their headphones and listening to the world for the first time. Mental clarity didn't arrive spectacularly, but it settled in firmly. He noticed that when he woke up, the mental fatigue typical of gray days was gone. It was as if his mind had undergone a silent cleaning while he slept. Things that had previously seemed complicated now became simple. Problems gained logical and quick solutions effortlessly. This new clarity of thought became his daily superpower. One of his greatest tests came when he had to make important decisions. Before, he'd become paralyzed, lost in contradictory thoughts. Now, with a clear mind, he took firm action. This clarity helped him break out of vicious cycles, like toxic friendships and unproductive habits. He learned to distinguish between mental noise and true intuition. And that, my friend, changes everything. If you want to experience this clarity, start by eliminating excess. Fewer screens, less immediate dopamine. Swap pornography for simple meditations, like the square breathing technique, for example. Cut back on caffeine and increase your intake of pure water. Read books that clear your inner vision, like Hal Elrod's A Miracle Morning or Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. They act as spiritual eyewash for those who want to see with the eyes of the soul. Another thing he noticed was a dramatic improvement in his memory. Before, he'd forget names, dates, and basic tasks. Now, he could even remember what he dreamed the night before. He'd become more alert, more present, more lucid. It wasn't magic, it was biology. His brain, with its neurotransmitters in balance, was functioning as it should. Retention had returned his mind to its original factory settings. This clarity also brought greater discernment to conversations. He no longer allowed himself to be swayed by gossip, manipulation, or unfounded opinions. When someone lied, he could tell right away. His perception had become so sharp that he could read even between the lines what the other person wasn't saying. It was as if a new radar had been activated, filtering out the useful and the fuzzy. Furthermore, the excessive sexual thoughts began to diminish. That constant mental restlessness, typical of those who constantly seek pleasure, faded. He could now read for hours without distractions. He could watch an entire documentary without picking up his phone. He could conduct meetings without losing his train of thought. It was pure focus. And that's rare these days, when everyone seems to have undiagnosed ADHD. With greater mental clarity also came the ability to plan better. Before, everything was urgent. Now he anticipates life's movements. He uses tools like Notion, Trello, and a physical planner, not as an obligation, but as an extension of his own brain. His mind no longer lives in putting out fires mode. It lives in creating the architecture of the future mode. The most curious thing? This mental clarity made him calmer. He stopped getting involved in silly arguments, stopped trying to prove himself right all the time. Instead, he observed, understood, and chose whether it was worth responding. This generated an aura of wisdom that others sensed in the air, even if they couldn't explain it. and those with clarity have an advantage. But what he didn't expect was that this clarity would only be the gateway to something even greater, a physical energy that seemed inexhaustible. 2. Physical energy that seems inexhaustible. In the first few days of retention, he could already feel a subtle difference in his body. It was as if an invisible battery was being constantly recharged. Before, he was constantly tired. He needed coffee to wake up, more coffee in the afternoon, and still, he could barely get through the day. But now, he woke up feeling energetic, wanting to move, and his morning sluggishness had vanished like smoke. His body, which had previously been crying out for rest, now demanded action. This energy wasn't agitated. It was vital. It wasn't a nervous impulse, but a solid, silent, stable force. He could walk further, run without tiring, lift weights with greater steadiness. And most curiously, his workouts began to yield more results than ever before. If before, the gym had been a sacrifice, now it was a pleasure. He felt his blood pulse with greater vigor, as if he were finally tapping into potential hidden in every cell. One of the biggest shocks was realizing he needed less sleep. Before, 8 hours seemed like a sure amount. Now, 6 hours of good sleep, and he was already feeling refreshed. And this wasn't a miracle, it was biology. The energy that had previously been wasted on constant ejaculations was now being redirected to his body. Muscles, immune system, respiratory capacity. Everything responded with greater vitality. It was like turning on an internal power plant. This energy also manifested itself in his willingness to undertake simple tasks. Tidying his room, he'd do it before his alarm even went off. Climbing the stairs, without panting. Carrying heavy groceries, easy. He was no longer the man who struggled through life. Now he felt like he was pushing the world, and this even impacted his self-esteem. He felt more alive, more present in his own body, more in control of his own strength. And it wasn't just physical. His libido, which had previously been an uncontrolled volcano, became a creative force. He was no longer held hostage by the urge to have sex or masturbate. All this energy condensed like lightning, ready to be channeled into something greater. It was at this point that he began practicing morning exercises, such as the 5 Tibetan rites and the monkey jump, and realized that his energy seemed to never run out. Even his friends noticed. "Dude, what are you taking?" they asked, and he smiled. It wasn't a supplement. It wasn't an energy drink. It wasn't a pre-workout. It was retention. It was his body returning to its original fuel. With this extra energy, he started implementing old projects, studying difficult topics, cooking, cleaning the house, meditating, and still had energy left over for more. It was as if his days had gained extra hours. He also learned to consciously direct this energy. There's no point in accumulating it and not knowing how to use it. So he began training in martial arts, not just for physical fitness, but also for energy control. Kung Fu, capoeira, jiu-jitsu, each awakened a dormant part of the body. And each training session felt like a conversation between accumulated energy and the desire to master oneself. But the most curious thing was the increase in his magnetism. People felt his energy. They said he was more alive, more animated, more attractive. And this went beyond appearance. It was the energy that could be felt in the way he walked, spoke, and moved. He was charged, not with anxiety, but with vitality. And those with physical energy have the power to act. Those with the power to act have self-confidence. And that's exactly when he began to notice something new. A quiet, unshakable self-confidence rising within him. 3. Silent and unshakable self-confidence. Before, he thought self-confidence meant shouting louder, impressing others, or asserting himself in any argument. But over time, and especially with semen retention, he discovered that true self-confidence is silent. It doesn't need applause or a stage. It comes from within, from the deep certainty that you are capable, even when no one believes you. And the most fascinating thing, this strength arises naturally when a man stops abandoning himself. He began to notice that he no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. Criticism didn't shake him, and praise didn't inflate him either. This was because his confidence came from another source, self-mastery. He knew what he was doing and why. He no longer bowed down for fear of rejection, nor sold himself for crumbs of approval. This firm, unselfish stance changed the way people perceive him. And the most interesting thing is that this was reflected in his body. His posture changed. His shoulders were more open, his breathing deeper, his gaze more direct. He didn't pose, he was, and those who are don't need to force it. His silence spoke louder than many speeches. And this, ironically, generated respect. In meetings, he was listened to. In groups, he was consulted, not because he spoke beautifully, but because he conveyed certainty. And certainty is magnetic. Instead of comparing himself to others, he began to compete with his own potential. If he had previously felt intimidated by stronger, richer, or more popular men, now that no longer fazed him. He understood that everyone has their own journey, and that no one can be more himself than he is. This clarity freed him. He stopped sabotaging himself and began building himself, one step at a time, one decision a day. And that made all the difference. With this new emotional foundation, he began taking more risks. He invested in investments he previously found difficult, like Treasury Direct, shares in solid companies, and even studied cryptocurrencies. He spoke in public without trembling. He took the initiative in difficult conversations. This confidence didn't come out of nowhere. It was built in practice, with each small victory, and consolidated by the energy he no longer wasted. And what's more, his self-confidence even changed his choices. Before, he would accept anything, any invitation, any woman, any job. Now he was selective. He knew his worth and wouldn't settle for scraps. This wasn't arrogance. It was discernment, and this discernment became increasingly sharp as he kept his vital energy intact. He didn't beg for attention. He attracted it. The change was also noticeable in moments of silence. Before, silence was uncomfortable. Now it was fertile ground. He learned to be with himself without feeling lonely. He discovered that loneliness isn't the absence of company. It's the presence of self. And this presence made him increasingly unshakable. Even amidst chaos, he remained calm. Even surrounded by doubts, he maintained his composure. Self-confidence also manifested itself in the way he viewed failure. Before, a mistake was the end of the world. Now, it was a learning experience. He stopped running from pain and started to engage with it. He understood that falling is part of life, but staying down is a choice. And those who choose to get up choose to grow. This mindset moved him away from self-pity and closer to self-accountability. And again, it all started with retention. Interestingly, this inner strength began to change the way he viewed others. He began to view others' insecurities with compassion, not judgment. He understood that many people only yell because they're afraid. They only attack because they feel weak. And so, he began to help not out of vanity, but out of maturity. And this made him even stronger. But what really surprised him was realizing that his presence now said everything, even when he was silent. And this intensified when his eyes began to carry a magnetic, almost hypnotic power. For magnetic gaze and striking presence. He never imagined a simple gaze could carry so much power. But that's exactly what began to happen. People began to stare at him longer, without quite understanding why. It was as if his eyes carried a silent force, something difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. And it had nothing to do with beauty or vanity. It was energy condensed into presence. The curious thing was that he didn't need to say much. He'd just walk into a room and suddenly he was noticed. Even when he remained silent, everyone sensed he was there. There was a different density around him, a vibration that stirred people's subconscious. It was as if the energy field that had previously dissipated due to his constant ejaculation was now firm, structured, and active. That magnetic gaze didn't come from trying to impress anyone. It was born from depth. When a man begins to truly know himself, his eyes change. They gain focus, intensity, purpose. And that's exactly what happened with him. The sparkle in his eyes was no longer empty. It carried stories, lessons, and self-mastery. Anyone who looked into his eyes felt a strength that came not from his mouth, but from his soul. Even flirting had changed. Before, you had to make an effort, be funny, and start a conversation. Now, people approached you with curiosity. They looked twice, started conversations, wanted to know who this man was who seemed to have something different. And all of this was a reflection of retention. When sexual energy isn't wasted, it rises. It transforms into natural magnetism, manifested in the look, the voice, the posture. He began practicing eye concentration exercises, like Tritaka, a yogic technique that involves staring at a candle flame without blinking. This helped strengthen not only his eyes, but also his presence. Reading silently for long periods, observing the world with mindfulness, avoiding the habit of scrolling through his phone, all of this trained his ability to sustain attention and, with it, project presence. His voice changed, too. It became firmer, deeper, calmer. And when he spoke, everyone listened, because there was something there that couldn't be explained in words alone. There was a vibration. People described it as a sense of security and stability. It was as if they were in the presence of someone who knew exactly who they were. And that, in today's world, has become a rarity. This magnetism also made him a good leader, even without wanting to lead. People asked for his opinions, wanted advice, approached him spontaneously, and he understood that this was a responsibility, not vanity. Therefore, he increasingly sought to care for what he felt, what he thought, what he emanated, because he understood that a man's presence can also heal or hurt. He chose to heal. Over time, even the photos reflected this change. His eyes became more vivid, his expression more serene, his countenance stronger. Those who knew him before and saw him now were surprised. "You look different, more intense. I don't know." He smiled. He knew it wasn't just appearance. It was essence. It was the accumulated and transmuted energy becoming visible even to those who didn't know what retention was. This kind of presence can't be bought. It can't be faked. It can't be trained with empty seduction techniques. It's the consequence of an inner journey, a journey that begins when a man decides to stop emptying himself. And in doing so, he begins to occupy the space that is rightfully his, not with arrogance, but with awareness. And whoever occupies this place attracts everything that was kept away. But with this new presence, he realized something even more liberating. He was no longer a slave to temptations. Now, he had emotional freedom from them. Everything I'm explaining to you here, I break down more calmly in my ebook, The Power of Semen Retention. It was created for those who are starting from scratch and want to know how to apply semen retention to their daily lives in a healthy way, without any crazy ideas or exaggerations. It's a practical guide, straight to the point. 5. Emotional freedom in the face of temptations. Before, all it took was seeing a sensual image, hearing a provocative voice, or smelling an enveloping perfume for him to lose himself. It was automatic, almost instinctive. His will felt like a live wire, exposed to any impulse. But with semen retention, something profound began to change. The temptations that had previously dominated him began to lose their power. He still perceived them, but now he had the power to choose. And that is freedom. The big turning point was realizing that the problem was never external stimulus, but internal weakness. He thought he needed to protect himself from the world, when in fact he needed to strengthen the world within himself. With each passing week, the provocations of the environment no longer shook him as much. He could see a beautiful woman and admire her without losing his cool. He could hear a tempting proposal and decline with ease. His mind was firmer, his heart more centered. He didn't run from temptations. He walked through them, and that's quite different. Before, he avoided leaving the house for fear of falling. Now he went out in peace. He knew his strength lay not in hiding, but in controlling himself. This gave him a sense of inner authority he'd never felt before. Emotional freedom became a kind of invisible shield. And with that, he stopped blaming himself for feeling desires. Instead, he learned to redirect them. One of the practices that helped him was morning journaling. Every day, he wrote down what he was feeling, without filtering. He noticed when stronger desires arose, and by writing about them, his mind gained clarity. He also began using affirmations like, "I am the master of my impulses, my pleasures and my peace. I am not a slave to the flesh." These phrases, repeated aloud, created a new mental pathway, and it worked. With this emotional freedom came smarter choices. He began to cut ties that revolved solely around superficial pleasure. Friendships based on parties, drinking, and easy sex were fading away, not out of morality, but out of conscience. He wanted something higher, and he understood that this required discipline. By saying no to what was shallow, he made room for what was profound. And most interestingly, this freedom didn't take away his joy in life. It increased it. He learned to enjoy a look, a touch, a conversation, without succumbing to the anxiety of having to get into bed. This made his connections richer. And people began to notice something different about him. He didn't chase, but he didn't reject either. He simply observed, felt, and chose, and this created respect. This emotional stability also helped him deal with situations that previously threw him off balance. A provocation, a nasty message, a criticism, now all of it was filtered. He began to respond calmly, or simply ignore it. He understood that reacting is a waste of energy, and that true power lies in remaining whole. This didn't make him cold, but firm, and firmness is what most men lack today. An example of this was when a former fling sent him a message full of innuendos. Before, he would have fallen for it immediately, but this time he took a breath, smiled, and didn't respond. Not out of pride, but out of freedom. He knew it would lead him back to old patterns, and he no longer fit into them. This was one of the most powerful feelings he experienced. Saying no without pain, choosing himself, choosing peace. And perhaps most surprising was realizing that the freer he became, the more attractive he became. His energy said, "I don't need you, I choose you." And that changed everything. Because deep down, true seduction is being free. And that freedom led him to something even more powerful, a brutal focus on his goals and objectives. 6. Brutal focus on goals and objectives. With his physical energy heightened and his emotional state stable, he began to see his goals differently. Before, his objectives had seemed distant, nebulous, and almost impossible. But now, with a clear mind and renewed inner strength, everything became clear. He began to wake up with purpose, knowing exactly what he needed to do. The distractions that had previously pulled him like magnets lost their power. He was focused, and those with focus have direction. Goals were no longer just vague desires. He sat down, wrote, and organized. He made lists, set deadlines, and broke them down into smaller daily targets. And the most incredible thing, he started achieving them, one step at a time, unhurriedly, but with discipline. Semen retention taught him something no one had taught him: consistency. It wasn't about doing a lot in one day, but doing a little every day with intensity. And that little bit added up. Fast. Social media? Silence. Useless news? Cut. Pornography? Never mind. He understood that the focus wasn't on forcing himself to work more, but on eliminating what didn't make sense. And the more he eliminated, the more time and clarity he gained. He used techniques like Pomodoro, studied with white noise headphones, wrote goals on the mirror. Everything was done to remind him, this is a direction. And he went. If before he spent hours in empty pleasure, now he invested in knowledge. He attended classes, read books like The Richest Man in Babylon and The One Thing. He learned about investments, productivity, finances, and spirituality. Each day was a new construction. Each well-spent hour was a brick. And the castle he wanted was no longer a distant fantasy. It was a concrete plan, one he himself was building. He also realized that focus has a lot to do with transmuted sexual energy. When libido isn't channeled towards sex, it rises and becomes a positive obsession. And that's what happened to him. He thought about his goals constantly, dreamed about them, and felt pleasure in moving forward. The excitement that had previously depended on bodies now depended on achievements. And this kind of excitement doesn't cause a decline. It causes growth. With his focus aligned, his days stopped being haphazard. He created a firm routine without excessive rigidity, but with consistency. He woke up early, exercised, meditated, read, and produced, and all this without feeling suffocated. On the contrary, he felt light, because there was no more guilt or self-deception. He knew he was building something, and this generates a satisfaction that no fleeting pleasure can offer. And most surprisingly, this focus began to attract opportunities. People who had never noticed him before began to call him for projects. They invited him to partner with them, do business mentorships. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a vibration. When a person knows what they want, the universe senses it and responds, because the world respects those who have clarity, and those who have clarity become a beacon in a sea of lost people. This even made a difference in relationships. He stopped getting involved with people who weren't adding to his life. If the conversation wasn't constructive, he didn't persist. If the relationship drained him more than it was worth, he walked away. Because those who are focused don't have time for drama. They have time for the truth. And this led him to develop a constant sense of self-evaluation. Is this action bringing me closer or further from my goal? And when the answer was walk away, he didn't hesitate. He changed course. He changed the environment. He changed his attitude. Because he now understood that focus is a muscle. And every day without training is a day it weakens. So he protected his focus like one would protect a treasure. Because he knew it was his focus that was transforming everything, including his relationships, which saw a drastic improvement. 7 drastic improvement in relationships. At first, he thought semen retention would only bring individual benefits. Energy, focus, discipline. But what he didn't expect was the incredible impact it would have on his relationships. He began to notice that his presence was more valued. Conversations flowed with more depth. Encounters, even the simplest ones, seemed to have more meaning. He had changed inside, and the world around him responded to that change. The first thing that improved was his listening. Before, he listened only to respond. Now, he listened to understand. And that changed everything. People began to open up with more trust, because they felt he was truly there, without distractions, without judgment. This true presence is rare, and for that very reason, it's powerful. He became the friend everyone wants around, the brother who welcomes them without drama. In romantic relationships, the impact was even more visible. He stopped being needy, clingy, and insecure. He no longer needed to prove his worth. He simply was. Women sensed this, and they responded to this energy with respect, admiration, and surrender. Sex, when it happened, was more conscious, deeper, and more connected. And sometimes he didn't even need it, because the bond was no longer based solely on that. Another important point was the end of unnecessary conflicts. Before, anything would trigger a fight. Now he could breathe, consider, and choose how to act. He stopped reacting impulsively. He developed self-control. He understood that not every argument is worth it, and that sometimes silence is wiser than the best answer. This more mature stance disarmed the other person, created space for reconciliation, and strengthened bonds. Something beautiful happened with his parents. He began to see them differently. He stopped demanding what they never received and began to honor their journey. He began visiting more frequently, talking more patiently, and showing affection. This brought about a healing that words cannot explain. Retention helped him restore old, often wounded bonds with love and presence. And what about his friends? A complete change. He stopped hanging out with groups that only talked about parties, pornography, and superficial things. And the most incredible thing, new friends began to appear. People aligned with his new purpose. Men seeking evolution, wisdom, transcendence. Together, they created a circle of empowerment. Sincere exchanges, mutual support, honest laughter, friendships that uplift. He also realized that his energy affected the environment. If he arrived with serenity, the environment calmed. If he smiled authentically, others relaxed. He had become a point of balance, no longer an agent of chaos. And all this because he was now whole, present, and most importantly, clean inside. Withholding energy made him less reactive, less needy, less desperate for approval. This emotional cleansing also led him to forgive. People who had hurt him in the past, betrayed his trust, or mocked his attempt to change. He simply let go, not out of weakness, but out of freedom. He learned that holding on to resentment is like taking poison and hoping the other person will die. He wanted lightness, and to achieve that, he chose to release the burdens of the past. This healed his relationships and himself. Another beautiful thing was seeing how his new relationships were more selective, but much deeper. He no longer wasted time with people who didn't vibrate on the same wavelength. He preferred to be alone than in bad company. And this discernment saved him a lot of stress. After all, when you start to truly respect yourself, you only accept those around you who know how to respect you back. And it was in this new cycle of healthy relationships that he noticed another transformation emerging. His creativity and productivity were soaring. It was as if, now that his heart was at peace, his mind had space to create. 8. Increased creativity and productivity. He always had good ideas, but he rarely managed to put them into practice. He'd start 1,000 projects and give up halfway through. He lacked energy, clarity, or motivation. But with semen retention, something almost magical happened. The ideas began to surface again, only this time they were accompanied by execution. His mind, clearer and less distracted, began to connect the dots more easily, and this connection turned into pulsating creativity. Before, he'd felt mentally blocked, as if something were clogged. Now, he felt like a river was running through him. Each morning, solutions, insights, and a desire to create emerged. He began writing, drawing, structuring courses, and building businesses. And the curious thing, what used to take days now flowed in hours. It was as if his brain had shifted gears. And it wasn't just energy, it was inspiration. He realized that retention has everything to do with creation. After all, semen is literally the raw material of life. By storing this energy, he felt as if he were incubating ideas. And when they emerged, they came with full force. He began using this accumulated energy to learn new skills, like video editing, digital marketing, copywriting. And all this without forced effort. He wanted to do it. He needed to do it. He began working in highly productive blocks of time with absolute focus. He used techniques like deep work, inspired by Cal Newport's book. I would turn off my phone, put on some soft instrumental music, and dive in. Sometimes I even forgot to eat. My mind was so immersed that time seemed to stand still. When I surfaced, I realized I had accomplished more in one morning than I had previously done in an entire week. He also began recording his ideas in a physical notebook. No more keeping them in his head. He wrote everything down. He made mind maps, drew plans, sketched out ideas for videos, books, products. And with that, he noticed how his worldview was changing. He no longer saw himself as ordinary, but as someone capable of creating value for the world. And this fueled a virtuous cycle. The more I created, the more I wanted to keep going. Furthermore, he began seeking out environments that fostered his productivity. He left his messy room and created a space of his own, a clean desk, good lighting, the scent of essential oils, and silence. This new environment became his temple of creation, and there he became almost a different person, inspired, active, productive. Retention helped him realize that creativity isn't a gift, it's a state, and this state can be cultivated. Interestingly, creativity also invaded unexpected areas. He began to cook with greater pleasure, compose simple songs, and organize finances in innovative ways. Even when resolving conflicts, he thought more flexibly. His creative mind made him more adaptable and strategic. He stopped being someone who repeats patterns and became someone who creates solutions. This made him indispensable in any environment, in business. He began to see opportunities where no one else did. Retention gave him not only vision, but also the courage to act. He invested in digital products, partnered with content creators, and learned about sales. He built a small structure with what he had. And there, something new was born, a creative entrepreneur with plenty of energy and impactful ideas. And best of all, without relying on anyone to move forward. This newfound productivity also cured his procrastination. He understood that the time he previously spent on vices could now be used to build his own reality. And this generated a pleasure far more lasting than any momentary orgasm. Because now he wasn't just creating things. He was creating better versions of himself. Every day, an upgrade. And that, my friend, is addictive in a healthy way. But with all this happening, he began to notice that something deeper was manifesting, a genuine spirituality and a connection with the divine that he had never felt before. 9. Deep spirituality and connection with the divine. The connection with the divine didn't come like a thunderclap. It came like a whisper, a different silence within him, as if something had been ignited. With semen retention, he began to feel his soul slowly awakening. Before, he prayed hurriedly and meditated shallowly. Now, spirituality ceased to be a theory and became an experience. And the most beautiful thing, it wasn't imposed by any religion. It was felt, lived, and true. The accumulated energy began to rise. He could literally feel it, a gentle vibration at the base of his spine, gradually spreading. It was as if his body had become a sacred instrument, and each conscious breath was a prayer. He began to wake up with gratitude in his chest. Even for no apparent reason, he felt guided, and, most strikingly, he felt he was no longer alone. He began practicing meditation every day, but now with presence. Sometimes in total silence, other times with mantras. He would sit with his spine straight, eyes closed, and attention on his breathing. And then came that profound peace, not the absence of noise, but the presence of God. A God who didn't shout, but welcomed, who didn't demand, but showed. And this connection became increasingly intimate, more real. He also felt more sensitive to nature. Touching a tree, stepping barefoot on the grass, observing the sky, everything seemed to communicate something sacred, as if the world were a living message, and he was finally learning to read it. This heightened perception wasn't delusion, it was sensitivity, and it came because he had cleansed himself internally. The channel was clear, and now the divine could flow. Spirituality also made him reevaluate his values. He began to take better care of his body, mind, and spirit. He avoided heavy foods, cultivated elevated thoughts, and spoke more kindly. He traded empty music for uplifting sounds. He read books like Autobiography of a Yogi, Meditations off Marcus Aurelius, and The Shaman's Path. Each page awakened something forgotten in him, an ancient memory of who he really was. Retention led him to mystical experiences he never expected. He had lucid dreams, profound insights during meditation, and feelings of oneness with the whole. He wasn't seeking miracles, but they came. And they weren't spectacular, they were subtle, like feeling time slow down, like noticing synchronicities happening, like having the distinct feeling that his prayers were being answered before he even finished. He also began to seek silence. He would go long periods without speaking, just feeling, and there in the silence, he heard answers that never came in the noise. He realized that the sacred is not only in temples, but in every gesture. Drinking water with attention, embracing someone with presence, cooking with gratitude. Everything became prayer. And this was spiritual freedom. He no longer depended on dogma. It was direct, pure, eternal. This new spirituality also made him more compassionate. He no longer judged people as before. He saw their pain with softer eyes. He knew that everyone is struggling with something invisible. And so, instead of condemning, he began to bless. He envisioned light for those who hurt him. He prayed for those who were lost. Because now he understood. When you connect with God, you also connect with humanity. And most powerfully, he felt he was becoming a channel. Not out of ego, but out of mission. He felt that his energy, his voice, his presence, all of this now served a greater purpose. He no longer lived just for himself. He lived in alliance with something greater. And this surrender didn't take away his identity. It expanded it. He was a man, but he was also a bridge. And this prepared him for something even greater, an irreversible inner transformation. Because with this divine connection, true self-mastery began to emerge, an internal transformation that would make him invincible from within. Want to start your journey with awareness and confidence? Then click on the first pinned comment now, get the ebook, and take the first step toward your transformation. It's all there, clear, objective, and designed for those who truly want to evolve. 10. Inner transformation and self-mastery. At the beginning of his journey, he sought control only over his impulses. But over time, he realized that semen retention was promoting something much deeper, a true inner metamorphosis. It was as if he were peeling away old layers, inherited masks, limiting beliefs. And at the center of it all was a cleaner, stronger, more aware self. A new man, forged in the fire of self-control. This self-mastery didn't come overnight. It was sculpted, polished, like rough stone being shaped with patience. He learned to observe his triggers. He knew when his mind wanted to divert, when his ego wanted applause, when fear tried to scream. But instead of reacting, he breathed. And in this simple act of not acting automatically, he gained power, the power to be his own master, the protagonist of his own story. The most interesting thing is that by mastering his sexual drive, he realized he could master any impulse. Anger, gluttony, laziness, anxiety, everything began to be observed with lucidity. It wasn't about repressing, but about recognizing and choosing. That was the secret. He wasn't fighting himself. He became an ally of nature itself. And with that, he stopped being a slave to his own habits. He began to shape new ones. He created daily rituals. Meditation at dawn, reading a sacred passage, exercising on an empty stomach, gratitude before bed. Small habits that, combined, create a new identity. He was no longer that reactive, impulsive, lost man. Now he was a warrior at peace. Strong, yet sensitive. Firm, yet flexible. And this was visible not only in his gaze, but in the choices he made daily. This transformation made him see life differently. The same problems that once drowned him were now stepping stones. He began to see challenges as tests from the universe, not punishments. He learned that everything that happens is an opportunity to grow, even setbacks. When he slipped up, he no longer condemned himself. He simply rose with greater awareness, because he understood that every mistake brings a lesson, and every lesson made him stronger. He also became more principled. His word became true. If he said he would do something, he did it. If he promised something, he delivered. This alignment between what he thought, felt, and did made him increasingly coherent. And this coherence generated personal power, because there's nothing more magnetic than someone who lives what they preach. He no longer needed to convince anyone. It was enough to be. And being now was his greatest achievement. With this inner mastery, even his spirituality became more stable. It no longer depended on mood or emotion. It was present in everything. In the way he walked, the way he looked, the way he lived. He felt God within himself, not as an abstract idea, but as a living force, acting through his actions. This daily connection with the sacred became his foundation. When everything shook outside, he remained firm within, and that was true freedom. The transformation also impacted his vision of his life's mission. He realized he wasn't here just to consume, accumulate, or gain status. He was here to serve, to transform, to expand consciousness. And this clarity brought a new kind of ambition, to leave a legacy. He no longer wanted to be simply remembered. He wanted to be useful. He wanted his life to have meaning beyond himself. And perhaps most beautiful of all, he began to inspire others, without forcing, without preaching, just by being. Men came to ask what he was doing. Friends said he was different. Brothers sought advice, and he helped with humility, because he knew that the true master is not the one who displays power. It is the one who awakens power in others. And this was his new role, to be a mirror of what is possible. But this story doesn't end here. It truly begins now, because after all this, he realizes semen retention isn't just a practice. It's a path, a portal, a calling. And now it's time for you to discover how all this can change your life too. After all this, the question remains, how long will you continue to ignore the man you could be? It's there inside you, just waiting for you to stop sabotaging yourself and start cultivating what truly matters. It's not easy, but it's not impossible either. It all starts with a decision. And that decision can change your energy, your relationships, your mindset, and even your destiny. So tell me, will you continue living on autopilot, or will you take control of your own life force? Will you continue falling into the same cycle, or will you choose evolution? If this content resonated with you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because here, we talk about what no one else has the courage to talk about. And if you want to go even deeper on this path, stay tuned for what's coming. Your awakening has already begun.